is where I've been for the last 20 or so years. And it was fascinating to me when we went through the financial crisis, or we're still in the financial crisis, because it was very clear that the kinds of things that have caused the environmental crisis are very similar to the kinds of human motivations that were causing the financial crisis. There was the issue of debt, huge personal and corporate indebtedness. That, of course, caused the trigger for the financial crisis, the mortgage debts in the United States. But people like me have been thinking and talking about ecological debt for a very long time. That it's been absolutely apparent that we've been using up the Earth's resources without any thought for how the planet is going to sustain human populations in the future. And I must be clear, my worry is not for the planet. The planet has got several billion years. My worry is for humans, because the way we're going, there is no conceivable way the planet is going to support 9 billion of us through the rest of this century. And the working out of that population reduction will be something that we certainly have never experienced before, and will make the cataclysms of the early 20th century look like relatively peaceful times. So that indebtedness was a really powerful force, both for the environmental crisis and for the financial crisis. Then there's the issue of value, and economics is fascinating because economics is supposed to kind of be the science of value. That's what it's about. It works out what it is that people value, how they value it, and then how they exchange it and produce it among themselves. And the one thing that was clear from the financial crisis was that values were absolutely wrong. They were all over the shop, and that the values that people thought they owned and possessed were completely misvalued. And of course, stocks fell hugely in response to that wrong valuation. And of course, the environment is completely unvalued. One of the things that fascinates me about environmental economics is that it is, in large part, a fascinating and pitiful attempt to get environmental values into the economic system. For most of industrialism, the economic system worked without any sense of environmental values at all. It pretended that the only values were values created by humans through the productive process, whereas actually the most fundamental values, the things that sustain everything that's important about civilization, are natural values. And to have built an economy that completely ignored those natural values seemed rather a foolish thing to do. Environmental economists have been trying in their own rather benighted way to get some of these values back into the economy, but we still have very little real purchase on natural value in the places where the big economic decisions are taken. So that's misvaluation. Then there was lack of transparency. But no one in the financial crisis really had the first idea of what was going on, or what these assets that they thought they had really consisted of. And similarly with the environment. There's been a huge explosion of climate science over the last 15 or 20 years. And really I think it's probably the first time that the human decision makers have actually wondered about whether the climate gives us anything that is valuable. And we suddenly realise that now we're about to lose a stable climate, that actually it is easily the most valuable thing that we could possibly have. In fact, it's an absolutely essential thing for civilization, and that we are gambling it away in the most reckless fashion, which leads to the excessive risk-taking. The fact that we'd set up incentive structures within the financial markets that encourage people to take excessive risks for the very large sums of money that they could earn. And of course, as we look at the risks that we're taking with the climate, we can see that excessive risk-taking is something that we do all the time. One of the most fascinating things about the financial crisis was that even the experts, some of the most highly paid people in the economy, had absolutely no idea what was going on. They I would listen to these guys day after day on the radio and at talks and stuff, and they hadn't a clue about what was happening within the financial system where they spent their lives and which had made them millionaires. And this was a really very interesting kind of perception for somebody who was interested in the environment, because we know we don't understand the environment. We know that the natural systems are bigger than our comprehension of them. There are very good theoretical reasons why we will never understand them properly, why they will always be bigger than us, and yet we have people who purport to be able to calculate valuations in an extremely precise sort of way. Obviously, quite a few people saw that the financial crisis was coming, and quite a lot of them tried to warn. Sometimes it was even their job to warn their bosses about it, as a result of which, if they weren't ignored, they were marginalised, and if they weren't marginalised, they were fired. And similarly, those of us, young and old, who've been engaged in trying to raise awareness about environmental issues, we find we're marginalised, we're humoured, and finally, we start to be taken seriously, just at the point where there is serious doubt as to whether it's too late and actually we can do anything about this stuff. But the real irony about this financial system thing was the government's response. The huge financial response. Chancellors of the Exchequer saying that they will spend however much it takes for as long as it takes to get the financial system back on track. The only other time when governments ever say that, of course, is when they go to war. So we have these two kind of examples of when resources can be found no matter what. For the environment, it is extraordinary how there's never enough money to do what needs to be done. And make no mistake, what needs to be done will cost an enormous amount of money. We need a completely new energy system. Over the last 20, 30, 40 years, much of my professional work is thinking about how that new energy system might come about. And it will take a huge amount of money. The good news is that we can do it. The technologies are there to do it, and the money is there to do it, but it is not mobilized to do it by the people who could do that mobilization. So it's deeply ironic to see the financial system having this vast sum of money mobilized, whereas a relatively small proportion of that would go an enormous way to meet the climate change targets which the government has set, and which it has very bravely set, but at the moment we don't look as if we are anywhere near going to meet them. And finally, and the last thing I'd want to say really, is about the importance of personal action, and the importance of everybody who's here, obviously today, and doing what they can. I read some of the press coverage of this event before I came, and needless to say, we're being humoured by the journalists who try to sell their newspapers, thinking that it's just a little festival and that it's a bunch of people being self-indulgent. And I've heard that very often said about anyone really who tries to do anything about this issue, that it's always too little, too late. So it's very curious how first of all it's not important, and then when it is important it's too little, too late. So I think what I would say is that it's important to be active at all levels, at the levels where we think we can have the greatest impact. We can all be active at a personal level, and the way this camp is organised clearly indicates to me that most people who are active at that level are, through their lives, expressing a different set of values, a set of values that is much more in line with the sorts of solutions that we need to move towards. But obviously personal action isn't enough. Obviously it's going to take political action. It's going to take political action at all levels, and we can all contribute to that and get active in that. And that's quite enough from me to start with, and I think it would be very nice now if people would introduce themselves when they say something, make a comment, I've said what I'm particularly interested in, but if you're particularly interested